Welcome to the second part of the Red Pill movie Rebuttals. Before I start with this, I want to offer an opinion about a pretty common criticism I've been hearing about the Red Pill movie. I've seen this from a lot of people otherwise supportive of the film, including Milo Yiannopoulos, and I've seen it echoed in other places, including in the comments to some of the videos I've done. The problem, some assert, is that Cassie J didn't press her subjects on any of their talking points throughout the movie. Whether they were feminist or MRA, she gave them an unfiltered and unchallenged platform to speak. While she did follow many of those segments with her own examination of the facts, and she certainly ended the movie on a note that made her position crystal clear, she did not confront her subjects on any of their claims. And to be fair and honest, taking this fly-on-the-wall approach doesn't serve up the intellectual fireworks that modern audiences tend to find more entertaining and satisfying. That said, this is the style that Jay has taken in her previous movies, and in my opinion, it makes for better documentary filmmaking. Respecting the intelligence of the audience, she simply presents all sides of a contentious subject, reveals what her research off camera says, and allows viewers to make up their own minds, even as the video diaries say a good deal about her personal thoughts. This isn't Michael Moore-styled, transparently agenda-driven documentary filmmaking. It's a method that affords her audience, especially those who come with no preformed opinions on the subject, the chance to make informed decisions. So what it lacks in manufactured drama, it more than makes up for in integrity. And that's my 2 cents, which is all any of us have. And now that I have it out of the way, we can move on to this installment of the Red Pill Rebuttals, this time on Chanty Binx, also known across the interwebs as Big Red. We all know her by her unparalleled skills as an engaging orator.
I'm reading, fuckface.
And I suppose it was inevitable that in doing this documentary on the men's rights movement, which is also by necessity an examination of modern feminism, that the now iconographic mug of Chanty Binx would be at least part of the mix. Binx begins her interview with a short declaration.
Violence only helps the oppressor, not the oppressed.
I don't bring this up because I want to take issue with what she said, but just to point out that there's no particular reason why she said it. She wasn't asked about violence. It wasn't even a part of the discussion. She just blurted it out, completely out of context, as though she were just trying to come across like a profound thinker. It fell short.
Violence only helps the oppressor, not the oppressed.
Wow, Chanty, you go girl. And to her credit, she did a little better when she was responding to questions she was actually asked, even if her answers were less than informed. For instance, Jay asked her how she responded to the charge from MRAs that feminists, despite claiming that feminism is a movement furthering equality between the sexes, ignores the issues faced by men and boys. Her response was informative.
Crimea River. Really, because feminism is a movement about the discrepancies when it comes to women's equality. Because we're still not there yet. So don't even start with that whole, but you don't think about the men's issue. Well, then you know what? Start your own goddamn movement, which they have, but maybe make it a little more about legitimate issues like custody and alimony and things that you think are unequal, which all stem from patriarchy.
I will at least give Binx credit for honesty. As she just told you, feminism is about women and women only. And if men want any attention for the issues they face, they need to, and I quote, get their own goddamn movement. Okay, that seems legit, or at least an accurate reflection of the facts on the ground, although it's also clear that Binx didn't get the memo that MRAs have been actively promoting awareness of problems in family court with custody for about 40 years, and that feminists have worked actively to undermine those efforts. This is particularly ironic because feminists, as Binx does in her interview, have always been lightning fast to claim that most of men's issues, child custody being one of them, were a result of patriarchy, which of course they want to dismantle, thereby bringing relief to both men and women.
I mean, if they look at the root causes of why, for example, women get custody more often than men do, women are supposed to be the mothers. They're supposed to be the natural born caregivers. So obviously, you has a vagina, so obviously you're going to be able to take care of the kitties.
Okay, let's set aside for a moment that Binx sounds like she's making some kind of psychotropic-induced baby talk for no apparent reason and focus on the thrust of the shop-worn feminist line she is spouting. That women enjoy a bias in custody decisions in family court because the court, with their roots in the patriarchal past, view mothers as the go-to caregivers, naturally endowed with characteristics that lend them to raising children. It is patriarchy that resulted in men facing discrimination in family courts. It was patriarchy, that sweeping, pervasive, and entrenched sexist system that assumed that mothers were more necessary to children than fathers. Well, I'll be damned if the historical record doesn't say just the opposite. This little tidbit might even come as a surprise to a few MRAs, especially as none of us has been able to escape the perpetual drone of feminist revisionism for as long as we've been able to hear people talk. English law, on which American and Canadian law is based, historically assigned custody in broken marriages by default to the father. Yes, you heard that correctly. At the pinnacle of the only form of patriarchy that ever actually existed, it was men who were assumed to be the better caretakers of children. Patriarchy, which is a misnomer I use here for illustrative purposes, was an advantage to men who wanted custody, not a disadvantage. Of course, as research strongly supports in modern times, the bias worked in favor of the well-being of children rather than to their detriment. As we can see today, the default assumption of mothers as primary caretakers after divorce has created nothing less than a perpetual cycle of poverty, youth delinquency, gang involvement, academic failure, teen pregnancy, drug use, and escalating divorce rates. But I digress. The question here is, how exactly did all this change? How did we get from a patriarchy that enabled children to stay with their fathers to a system that so routinely advantages women at the expense of men and their children? Meet Caroline Elizabeth Sarah Norton. Norton was an English social reformer and writer in the early and mid-19th century. She left her husband in 1836 and was subsequently denied access to her children. Being one of the first high-profile activists for women's rights, her intense campaigning led to the passing of the Custody of Infants Act of 1839, widely recognized now as the Tender Years Doctrine, the Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857, and the Married Women's Property Act of 1870. Now, in fairness, it must be said that many modern feminist scholars, and I do use that term loosely, do not regard Norton as a feminist, though the truth is that I cannot find an incidence on record of a feminist questioning Norton's feminist credentials until after the fathers' rights movement emerged to protest the bias in family courts. There is plenty of evidence that Norton was historically regarded as a feminist, such as this record from the database of Yale University. And it is not that it really matters whether Norton herself was a feminist. The point is that the feminist perspective on sex and custody, on the view of patriarchy as the force behind the bias in family courts, is pure feminist mythology. It is a work of fiction to which the whole patriarchy-obsessed feminist establishment subscribes without question. And as we can see from Binx, it is an assertion they tend to wield as though it was a sword of truth, forged in the fires of empiricism and used as a death blow against MRAs who in part fault feminism for family court bias.
The assumption that women are naturally better caregivers yours is part of patriarchy.
So it's plain to see that according to Binx, feminists want to end the bias in family courts by dismantling patriarchy. Unfortunately, it's also plain to see that Binx, like other feminists, is full of shit. As MRA attorney and National Coalition for Men Vice President Mark Angelucci said in the Red Pill movie, every time a shared parenting initiative finds its way to the ballot in an American state, feminist organizations come out in force against it. The official position of the National Organization for Women is against shared parenting and for the custody bias favoring women in family courts to continue. Strange activity indeed for a movement lamenting the assumed role of women in the caretaking of children. Chanty Binx had little more to say in her brief appearance in the Red Pill movie, and it would be easy, entertaining even, to just roll out the rest of her spiel and pass some time by poking fun at it. After all, Binx is crazy, and she's outmatched intellectually by anyone with enough brain activity to keep them off a respirator. But she did manage to encapsulate her views, as well as the dominant view in feminist culture on the custody issue and all other gender-based discrimination where men and boys are the clear victims. For Binx, Cry Me a River is a slogan, a repetitive mantra she invoked with a rare brand of feminist honesty. During one exchange she had with Dan Perrins, a Canadian MRA who lost his brother to suicide, he brought that issue up as a pressing problem for men. Binx's response? Cry me a river. Since I really have no way, either by snark or by outright moral repudiation, to reply to something that sick, I'll just end today's talk from An Ear for Men. As always, I hope you've enjoyed. We'll see you next time. And remember, feminism is cancer.